Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are or whenever you're watching this. Welcome to How to Drum and Bass. My name is Jesse, and it is my mission to take what the top producers in drum and bass are doing right now and to teach it to you so that you can improve your drum and bass production. And you can ask me at any time of the day, or even wake me up at night and ask me, do you love Jumpup? And the answer will be yes, because Jumpup is fucking awesome. But there is someone who doesn't love Jumpup, and that person is Boo, or whoever did the vocals for Boo's song, Fuck Jumpup. I just checked and it's B Live, but I don't know who that is, so sorry, dude, but you killed it. If you ever see this, that was sick. This song has been blowing up over the last couple of months, and of course it does, because in the realm of drum bass right now, funny equals good, right? We have a lot of bowling, we have all the weird sounds that come from headaches, we have the incredible sonic twists that Sota does. Like, the more disgusting or the funnier it gets, the better it performs. And so does Fuck Jumpup, because funnily, I mean, it's not really Jumpup what comes after the drop, but it also isn't not Jumpup. It has been remixed to then have a Jumpup drop, which again, I love that shit. So today's video was inspired by Arc Nade, who, shout out to him, is an awesome guy who's doing really well on YouTube, and you should go check him out. He did a remake of this song, but it's in FL Studio, which sucks. And as good of a job as he did, there was a couple of things that I think could have been done better. So I wanted to make my own version of Fuck Jumpup and take it to the channel, show you guys how I did it. So if you're ready, then let's go. As always, you can download the presets of pretty much everything in the link down below. And also, if you like my content, I will be releasing a Start-to-Finish Jumpup drum and bass course, which is gonna be many hours of me going through an entire song from the beginning to the end. If you might be interested in that, there's also a link in the description where if you sign up now, if you pre-register, you'll get 50% off when it comes out. All right, without further ado, let's dive in. All right, so our recreation that we're going to be making today sounds like this.
Walking through the rave and I feel the vibe, black tracksuit and my Nike Air Dunks on. Been the same thing ever since I was a younger. Everywhere I go, all I hear is fuck Jumpup. Fuck Jumpup.
All right, so we're gonna start with the intro. It has a lot of the elements from the drop already, so by building the intro, we can quite seamlessly go into the drop after that. All right, so first let's build some structure. Let's get the drums down. And the drums are actually pretty easy. It's just a hi-hat, essentially, that's sort of determining the rhythm while that Reese comes in. So I've got this hi-hat group here. There's something that didn't really work out. So actually it's only just one thing, but on the group, I put the EQ just to take out the lows because hi-hats don't need lows. And it's just a very simple pattern where it comes every time on the first beat. But one thing that you're going to notice throughout this entire track is that Boo likes to humanize a lot of the elements in his songs. What that means is that it's not just a very mechanical hi-hat hitting the same every single time, but it'll vary over time, and that happens there. It also tends to happen in Boo songs with the drums, just keeping things real, keeping things interesting. What you'll see is for this hi-hat, I just got a hi-hat sample. Nothing crazy about that. I put the volume up a little bit, that's all. And then I put a humanization sequence of Ableton stock plugins on there. And if you haven't seen it, I have a whole video about how to make your hi-hats more human. If you haven't watched that so far, go watch it now because it'll go much more in depth and it'll make you understand what we're doing here, because I'm going to be a little bit briefer about it now. So essentially what we've got is we've got an instrument rack that has a vocoder and 3 LFOs here. And then we've also got a utility. And essentially what these LFOs do is they are set to random and to slightly different rates. And what they do is they randomize a couple of the parameters. In this case, they randomize the release time, how long the hi-hat sample goes, the envelope depth of the vocoder. So the vocoder adds a noise layer and a formant shift, which essentially gives it more of a noise tail in the end. All of these are mapped to these 3 parameters from the vocoder, which you can see here, they're going a little bit crazy. And that means they're going at random rates between certain parameters. So the parameters are quite close, between 40, 50%, 46%, so they don't go all that crazy, but it does make that the hi-hat becomes a lot more interesting. When we solo it, without all of this, it sounds very boring, right? It sounds like... But when we put that on, it sounds like this. So you can hear that each hit is slightly different. That's almost it for the drums already, but to look ahead a little bit, there's one more additional piece of drums that happens, and that's just before the drop. So when we play the original song, we hear this.
Jump up.
We hear that whipping sound, like whoop. And actually, this is just a kick, but in reverse. So what we did is I grabbed the exact kick sample that we're going to be using in the kick from the drop, and I just pressed R on the keyboard. You can reverse it that way, and it sounds like this. So that's exactly what we hear here. Nice. And this is a really cool way to sort of whip into your track, especially if, like this song, your build-up isn't all that, you know, special. Just give some extra oomph to everything. Right, then, Boo really fills up his tracks a lot with stuff that's on the background that you wouldn't initially maybe hear, but that makes the track sound filled up and just generally speaking more professional, more interesting, more atmospherical. And there's a lot of those. And in the intro, we can kind of hear that there's sort of like a vocal droning going on in the background. You hear it on the background. So, and I also seem to detect that maybe there was something like a wind kind of thing on the background, because quite a lot of artists like to take actual atmospheric textures. So they might record something like the wind or the rain or the water and just kind of stretch it out over the background. So what we've got here is I got a sample of some wind. Quite subtle, but a nice droning sound to fill up the entirety of the background. And I found on Splice, I just typed in eerie vocal because it sounded very eerie, and I found this thing. And so there's little to no processing on either of these because we don't need to get rid of any highs because they're in the intro and there's not that much going on anyway. Sorry, the lows, I mean. So then there's this group processing where I've taken out some of the lows because we're going to have that Reese bass come in, and where I've applied a very high mix on the reverb with just a kind of standard decay. The rest is all standard settings, but it sort of stretches those things out over time and makes them more drony and really give them that background feel. And then the last thing that I did is what you can hear is that they don't just appear in the intro, they come in gradually and then they leave before the section ends again. So I've got a utility here that's automated to the gain, and you see here it goes from -infinity all the way to 0, and then it comes back again, and that happens twice here in this intro just until the drop. The last sort of atmospheric maybe element, but I think it would be referred to as a texture, is this air raid that you hear on the background, which you can hear if you listen closely. Right, it's like a very elongated siren going on in the background, and it goes through the whole thing. It's on the background there as well. So I found an air raid sample also on Splice, and that's just what you got to do when you'll be making your own tracks. You'll just look for stuff to fill it up, and you can search for textures, you can search for atmospheric sounds. But really, what's really cool, what you can do is think about the stuff that you hear in your environment, like in your city or whatever. That's where these things come from. Like these guys, I think they live in London or somewhere else in the UK. There's a lot of police going around. There is wind. I mean, you know, you could sample some rain, whatever. You can be as creative as you possibly can. I got this air raid siren, and it wasn't long enough for my liking. So what you can do, right, is you can just manipulate samples all you want. So if you want it to be longer on a certain tone, you can just chop it up and let those little samples make you sort of a new longer sample that is to your liking. And the beautiful thing is, because we have like super high reverb on it, that just kind of glues everything together, and you can do some crossfading here like I did. That makes things very easy and sort of equalized. All right, then of course we got the vocals, which I got from lalal.ai, which if you want to check that out, it's a step splitter. You can check out a link in the description. Basically separates anything from the original track. Very useful. And we got the vocals here.
Walking through the rave and I feel the vibe pump up.
Pretty nice. And then of course the final element in this intro is the Reese that's already coming in. So let's take a look at what we did here, because it is actually not that hard. It's basically just a standard Reese with loads and loads of distortion. So let's take all of these and turn them off. Just gonna group them together real quick and turn them off, and let's dive into Serum. So all we have is a saw wave, but then the one from basic MCB because it's slightly different. I like that a bit more. And that's also how Arc Nade did it. -1 octave. We put some unison on there. You can play around with how much unison you want, but 4 seemed like a good number here. And then all we're doing is we've got this LFO here, which you can use to make the wobble effect in the Reese. As you can see, we're not doing that here, but it's mapped to the level. But I could change this around and sort of make it wobble more if I wanted to do that. But we're going to do that with a filter, actually, so you can ignore this. What we do use is LFO number 2. And LFO number 2 is a little bit special because it has the rate is mapped to the note here. So what that means is that the lower the note, the lower this rate is going to be. And the higher the note, the higher this rate is going to be. And what this is going to do is what you hear in a lot of Reese sounds is that it goes right? It's slow versus fast. And that is essentially just either one of these volume automations or a filter that's going slower or faster. To put all of that sort of in one LFO, what we can do is we can use this note to modulate the rate of this LFO. And we just need a shape like this, although of course you can play around with the shape to change the timing of it. And it runs all the way until 1/64th, I think. And when I play it, you can also see what happens to it.
Walking through the rave and I feel the vibe pump up. Black tracksuit and my Nike Air Dunks on. Been the same thing ever since I was a younger. Everywhere I go.
So you see that little blue dot where it actually is. You see that change. That's depending on the note. And so this is mapped to this filter here, as you can see, to the mix of the filter. And that's what creates that wobble effect. Other than that, you've got some FM from B going on over here, but actually you can ignore that because it's from oscillator B. We're not using that. And then for the effects, we have a tube distortion, a multiband compressor with basically standard settings, but just a bit more gain. And we got this MG low filter here with all standard settings, a cutoff of 331 Hertz. And yeah, this mix mapped here. And that sounds by itself like this.
Walking through the rave and I feel the vibe pump up. Black.
Or just by itself. So that's okay, but it's definitely not fat enough, right? Like there's nothing, it's very thin. What we want to do is we basically just want to destroy this Reese, right? And there's a couple ways that you can do it. First, I used Ableton Saturator at a very, very high level. Of course, you got to put the soft clip on, hard curve, but you want to turn the output down as well equally so that your ears don't get completely fucked up. So that's already better. And then what I wanted to do is I wanted more fuzz in there. So you can do that with an erosion. Adds noise layer, a wide noise layer to about 2.8K. That gives it a little bit more sort of crunchiness. You hear that? And then what I did is I used Decapitator, which is essentially just a saturation / distortion plugin. And I used a drive of 6 and I played around with a few of these settings. Really, you can use any saturation or sort of sound destroyer plugin. There's so many on the market. It's really arbitrary. And that gave it some extra volume as well. Now we've got something that's fat, right? And then the last couple of things that we want to do is it gets filtered in and out. So what you can hear in the original song is that it comes in and it comes out.
Walking through the rave and I feel the vibe pump up. Black tracksuit and my Nike Air Dunks on. Been the same thing ever since I was a younger.
See, it gets filtered in and out, and what you can hear is you can hear the shh. If you've ever wondered how to achieve that, it's essentially just a filter that has the resonance up, and the resonance sweeps these high tones through. That's the shh. So that's what we want to do here. So we've got this auto filter here. You can also do this with an EQ, of course, but we're automating this Reese, right? So we've got the auto filter and we click the frequency and then we can use this automation to filter it out at the end of every little section and then to filter it out, And towards the end, there's a little bit different notes that sorts of drop and it filters out again, but in a slightly different way. And so when we use these notes, which are very simple, it's just E1 and G2, E1 and G2 until the end where you end on G2 and then go down E, B, F. That sort of leads into the drop. And this will do the filtering for you. As you can see, it'll move by itself. Nice. And then lastly, I don't want the full version of this Reese just yet in the intro, so I chose to EQ a few things out. And what we can do is we can take the on and the off of this as well, and we can map these points here as well. We only want this to be on in the intro. So we're gonna put it here and here, and then we're gonna turn it off after that, so that when we mix sections, it turns off. And now I haven't gotten that much out of it, but you could take out more lows or more highs. So for example, like this. Or just take out more of the lows. For now, I think this is probably okay. We don't need that much. I just wanted to shave off some of those extra highs.
Walking through the rave and I feel the vibe pump up. Black.
Yeah, nice. All right, that's it for the intro. Together, that sounds like this. So now you can hear that air siren come in.
Walking through the rave and I feel the vibe pump up. Black tracksuit and my Nike Air Dunks on. Been the same thing ever since I was a younger. Everywhere I go, all I hear is fuck Jumpup.
All right, so let's get to the meat and the potatoes. Let's get to the drop. So immediately what we can see is we definitely have that Reese come back in here, right? Now with that EQ turned off, of course, so it's the full sound, so it hits harder in the drop than it did in the intro. Now actually the note is just G2. That's basically it. But we do still have this filtering going on. As you can see, it just filters out and it filters back in. So it goes essentially. So you want to draw an automation like that. If you want to copy it, this is what it looks like. This is one of them, and the other one automates a little bit deeper. So that's what that is. And it'll sound like this. See, so the second sweep is a little bit more intense. That also happens in the song. And that's also a nice way when you automate things to automate them slightly differently on each hit or every other hit or so, just to not bore the ears and make things more interesting. And so the other very noticeable thing when we listen is there's a huge sub bass that sort of foregoes everything, right? Very heavy sub bass. So let's get to working on the sub bass. It doesn't have to be that difficult. Now let's have a look at the notes here, because we also have that sort of croaky sound coming, but that actually doesn't come until after the first little bit. But the sub bass does come all the way in. And this is actually a really nice technique to sort of create some syncopation in your tracks, is to make things that hit on slightly different parts of the first beat. We have this sub bass here. By itself, it sounds like this. Ooh, very heavy. And it's very simple. It is, and shout out to Arc Nade for showing this, because I didn't know this way to do it. So another reason to go check this guy out. He's fucking awesome. It's like you would make a sub bass, right? You have a normal sub, you have just the basic shapes, but he also added what is essentially the harmonic series, but now it's just basic shapes with a bin added here instead of here, right? But you could use the harmonic series for that as well. But the phase is different so that it hits slightly differently from the sub oscillator here. And what we've got is just some tube distortion here, but then some of the magic happens when, we want to filter out all the highs. So if we turn all of this off, right, it sounds like it still has a lot of highs from that typical sine wave. We want to take that out. And then we want to put a glue compressor on there and just sort of give it some extra volume and bring things up. But that will add some distortion because we got the soft clip on. So then we just take this other EQ8 and we just take that out again. You can sort of play with this last EQ if you wanted to have less or more tonality, right? You could also put it here and just get a much more purer sound. But that's not what we're doing today. So yeah, very easy. And the sub bass just plays on E2, which I think is also the key of the track. All right, and then of course we want to have that sort of grotty sound, right? This sounds like this. Now, I have to say, I think we came close. Definitely not the exact interpretation, but these things are quite specific sound design. Usually sounds like this. If someone ends up getting really high and they just sit there for hours and hours and hours, and then they come up with something crazy that is just a combination of like a couple bend modes and a frequency shifter and et cetera, et cetera. So it's harder to make the exact timbre, but I think we got pretty close. Let's listen once more. So it's like very croaky, right? Like a frog kind of thing. And what we can do is we can layer that. We can make the back tonality and we can make the frog, because it's hard to do that in one patch. So I followed along with Arc Nade on making the beginning of the sound, but it was still missing a lot of croakiness. So what I got is this layer, which is similar to what Arc Nade made, but I gave a little bit more of a sort of gritty twist to it. And then we've got this grotty sound, which is like a Belgian Jumpup kind of. Yes, exactly. The really gnarly sort of shit. So for this wobble, it looks like there's a lot going on, but there's not. But there is a very interesting technique here. So basically what we have here is just this basic MG and a PWM restricted, which is essentially a wavetable that already has one of the bend modes applied to it in the wavetable position. One at -2 octaves and one +1 and +7, right? We want to get that perfect fifth going. And oscillator B is at a wavetable position of 71. And you can sort of play around with that. It doesn't really matter. Most of the time, when you have a certain wavetable position or when you see someone who doesn't explain much about it, that wavetable position is just he dragged it up and down until he heard which sounded the best. Because wavetables are actually something that goes usually from like a lower tonality to a higher tonality or vice versa. And they just want to pick the right timbre. So we have those two. Then we have an MG low filter of which the cutoff is modulated. And we've got this LFO here that does that. What you kind of want is you want it to hit a little bit later so that it keeps some space for the beat. So that's why I made the shark fin. But that's completely up to you. You could also just have it be here and have a more direct attack, because we did already leave some space in the notes here. What you can see is we left some space here. So that really just controls when all the volume automation and the filter automation comes in. In this case, we're putting it back there. And that controls the cutoff of this filter. So just to give it a little bit more of that extra whack, 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 sort of that movement, right? Wow, 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 wow. Nothing special about that for the rest. Then we have some effects. We've got a tube distortion of which the drive is also modulated. And what that does is just gives extra movement as it progresses according to this shark fin, so that it sounds more distorted in the middle of the sound than it does at the edges. We got a multiband compressor, like, you know, because we slapped that on everything basically. Then we got an AQ that moves a little bit and it makes a bit of a difference. Versus... it just sort of adds a little bit of tonality there. Adds a little bit of the highs here too. And then we have another filter, which is just, again, making some movement to the sound. Versus... see, it sort of takes out that harshness that's present in the top. There you go. It just sounds a lot better. And then just to change the tonality a bit, we got a flanger on there, so... I felt like it just gave it a little bit of X factor. I'm not really sure how to explain it. But when you're making a patch in Serum, one thing you can always do is just to try and mess around with either a flanger or the phaser and just mess around with the rate a little bit. It might give you some really interesting tonalities. All right, and then, so we had the bass sound, right? But if we turn all of this off again, group it, it sounds like this. So that's not really where we want to be. We want that sort of middle to top end to be much, much more distorted, and we don't need that much of the low end because, well, we've got this big sub playing, right? I added 2 OTTs with these settings. Essentially, these are both just to take out more of the, you know, the tones that are in the sound and equalize the volume of every frequency a bit more. And then I went on a mission to saturate this thing, and I used the Camel Crusher. And by the way, if you want to, the Camel Crusher is really cool, and that's also a plugin that gets used quite a lot in some tutorials, but it's abandonware, what it's called. So nobody's fixing it up anymore, and it doesn't show the interface anymore. Yeah, in Ableton Live 11 at least. So, but what you can do, if you didn't know, you can actually, if you press this little thing here, you can just see all the controls of this plugin just next to you, and you can still use them and change them. So even if a plugin is missing the interface, this is how you do it. And it works for everything, right? This is a third-party plugin as well. You can just get everything here instead of getting it in the interface here. Anyway, so we put it on the British clean because I love it in it. That's really all I did. And then I added some reverb and just at a very short decay and like 9% mix, just to give the sound a little bit of roominess. Sometimes you don't want the whole reverb tail, but you just want the idea that it sounds a bit less like it came from a computer. And you can do that by setting just a small mix and a short decay like this. So, versus, it sounds just more realistic. And then I felt like the sound wasn't distorted enough, but I didn't want to distort the whole thing. And also, you can use a multi-band distortion plugin, but they're expensive. They're like 150 bucks, and I didn't really want to spend 150 bucks because it is stupid to pay for something when you can really easily do it yourself. So we've got some multi-band distortion going on here. This is just an instrument rack that I made, which I will include in the download link for the presets below. And essentially all it does is it's an instrument rack that has a dry signal and a non-dry signal. As you can see here, these parts are part of the wet signal, essentially. Let's call it wet real quick, and let's call this dry. And you can see there's nothing here. So this is the dry sound, what we have already, which, by the way, sounds like this. Right? That's not so cool yet. And we've got wet signal. And these macros are mapped actually just to the frequency of this band here, which I kept pretty small. I wanted to distort between, you know, like 183 and 800 hertz. That's what I wanted to give some extra pizzazz. What we're doing here essentially is just taking that band and then putting a big saturator behind it and mixing it with a dry signal that has nothing here. And that's how you can do multi-band distorting. So we're only distorting that little part of the frequency. And you can mix these wet and dry signals. If you go to this, if you click chain, you will get this little part here that determines how much of this volume it's displaying, right? So it's between 0 and 127. I'm not really sure why it's that value. And I've just cross-faded these here. You can do that by taking these. And what it means is when this little marker is in the middle, it's 50% of one and 50% of the other. That makes it a lot more accurate than just playing around with these decibel things. And then I've got a macro here that moves this knob around so that I can change how much of the dry and the wet signal I have, which you can do for anything. You can make your own dry and wet signal. It's great. But right now it's smack in the middle. So with it, without it, it sounds like this. And with it, it sounds like this. So it just gives it a lot more. And then last but not least, I did want to take out a bunch of frequencies just to give this its own little space in the mix. And I played around a little bit and found that I wanted to take some of this like harshness around 1.5 and 300 hertz out. The 300 hertz is more like muddiness. This is more like harshness, I guess. There's no way to teach you how to do that. You just take an EQ, you go around and see how it sounds. All right, so the end result sounds like this. And then that's cool, but that sounds more tonal than it sounds croaky, right? Because the original sound is like a pregnant frog or something like that. So we want to add a grotty sound, and this is very, yeah, it's like a Belgian jump-uppy kind of sound, and it's pretty easy. What we do is we get a really gnarly wavetable. Like Wraith is a good one, but you can use a lot of the digital or the spectral ones. We want to apply the bend knob here. That's what's going to sort of give it that really grotty sound. And you can see here that we have an envelope here that makes it stabby. That's essentially what it does. On the level, right, so it gets that stabby level automation, and on the bend, so that the bend moves around. So you can see the wavetable move. It just gives it a little bit more extra movement. And then you'll see here, and also at the previous patch, that the rate is around 3.8 hertz. I played around with that so that it got the right timing after the drop, but you could probably put that at like an eighth note or at something. Yeah, you'll have to figure it out. But for me, I like not putting the BPM on and then just listening to where it fits in the timing of the song. And then so for effects, we just got some distortion and a compressor. But what really gives that sort of grotty feel to it is actually this shifter. Yeah, of course, we're using also OTT and some extra saturation, blah, blah, blah. But without the shifter, it sounds like this. Right? That's still very boring and not as deep, or I'm not sure how to call it, but we want it to hit the soul more. So a shifter, you can basically just change the pitch. So you put it on frequency mode and you can just turn it up. Instead of this, we can make it higher pitched. Right? That's a lot nicer. And you can even make it crazier. You can go all the way up and make it like a crickety kind of sound or something like that. So we put the shifter on there, but it's still quite soft. So we want to take out more of the sound. So let's slap an OTT on it and add some mids, make it sound like this. Now that's already a lot better. Then you can probably get away with some saturation, right? It's not necessary, but it does make it sound better. And then I opted to put an extra EQ in it, but I didn't think it was necessary. I wanted to make it fit in the mix, but it took away a lot of the high crispiness. So this one is actually not necessary. And together, that makes it sound like this layered. Now that is already a lot more like a croaking toad. So, nice. What that means is we have all the elements from the drop, at least except for the drums and everything that's behind it, right? So all of that sounds like this. Now we need some drums. So in this case, what we have here is we have this little drum group here. It has no group processing. We've got a kick, Just a very easy kick, and the pattern is a little bit interesting because it follows a very traditional drum bass pattern, but in the end of this bar, it takes out the kicks actually, which you can hear also in the original song.
Jumpup.
So we're taking out some kicks here, and we're taking out some kicks here at this end section too. And then when we listen to what the snare is supposed to be,
Jumpup.
it doesn't even sound like a snare. It sounds a lot more like a clap. So I went for that clap as well. I got a clap sample, very easy. But I noticed that just like with the hi-hats, the clap was a little bit more humanized, and it tended to be a little bit different on each hit. So what I did is, this clap is quite central. Just a real normal like 909 clap. But I wanted to add a layer on top of that for some more sort of timbre changes. What I did is I just got another clap here, and I shaped it a little bit with this MIDI shaper to sort of get rid of the tail. You don't really have to do that, but I like doing that in the process. And then I upped the highs with a high shelf, and then I added, just like we did with the hi-hats, I automated some parameters on the vocoder again to sort of maybe sometimes give it a little bit less release time or some more tail or some more of that vocoder noise layer. And so that means that this layer here makes the character of the clap. You can hear, just like with the hi-hats, it makes it more human. So together those sound like. And as you can hear, it's truly random. And then another thing that we hear is actually quite nice. The placement of the hi-hats is in between the kick and the snare. So you have just an extra rhythmic element going on. So it's boom, or something like that. You can hear it here. So it's like, it actually fits really nicely in between the beat. And we just got the same hi-hats from before, but now I turned with some automation. I made the whole humanized thing into a group. And as you can see here, it is turned off in the drop here because it doesn't really need it. And we actually want that hi-hat to be a little bit more consistent in here because it supplies a bit more of the character of the rhythm. So it just hits every time on 1.3 and then 2.3 and etc. And together the drums sound like this. All right. Now let's say we have the drums and we have all of the elements here that sort of make up the meat and potatoes. We have the vocal and we have all the little drop elements. It sounds like this. It's cool, but it needs to be filled up. And again, Boo is really very big on putting sort of foliage or textures or atmospheric sounds in there. And we got a couple of things here. So let's see what we can hear. That's a really good exercise as well. It's just listening to a song and seeing what is there that you normally wouldn't notice. So immediately on the first hit, we hear an exhale. It's like, right? So that's something we could put in there. Also there. It's like someone dropped something in a very large room, right? Like maybe a stick or something like that. Again, that exhale. And look, here's a little laser sound.
Jumpup.
And there we have some glitchy computer sound kind of thing, filling up that little space there as well, going nicely under the vocal. And it's things like that that take a track from sounding empty and unprofessional to sounding like someone made it who knows what they're doing. They insert the things that you don't notice when they're there, but that you do notice when they're missing. It's kind of like salt in a way. Salt makes food taste terrible when it's not in it. And it's exactly the same with these texture elements. So we're going to add a bunch of them. For one thing, that air raid comes back in. It comes back in around the second part of the drop. So if you listen closely, it's there on the background. It's subtle, but it does add something extra. And then, of course, we have this little laser sound. So what you can just do is just get a sample from a laser on Splice. What you hear is it sort of panned between two ears, or at least it was a delay. So we just got a laser sound and chop it up a bit. Right, this was a longer laser sound, but you could just take out the notes that you want and then just put a delay on it that just goes and delays it. And when you put it on ping pong, it does the automatic panning to the left and the right ear. So that makes it very nice in the mix, little element to add that stereo field. And then the same thing with the exhale. It's really just someone saying, ah, and then a delay on it. So we grabbed a sample and did the exact same thing. And then similarly, you know, it might be a different exhale, but there's also a little stick thing that we heard, right? Like, and that's the same thing. We just take a sample again, and it's just a percussion hit, really. And we just add maybe, you know, you can add some saturation, make it sound a little bit fuller. Again, you add a delay. And in this case, you know, we want to add some reverb, make it sound really roomy, because it sounds like someone's dropping something in like a big empty warehouse or something. Make it sound like this. Right? So that also, because it has that longer reverb and delay tail, really fits up nicely. All these elements, the longer they sort of drone on, the more nicely they fill up the space that you're trying to fill up. And then the last thing is like this little glitchy sound at the end, right? So we got this one.
Jumpup.
That. Now, I couldn't find a sample exactly like it, but just again, it's the same principle. You just take some kind of sample that you find. I looked for like a chop machine sound or something like that. And you just add a bunch of saturation, delay, and reverb to it. That's all you need to do. Just fill up that space. Yeah, so altogether, that's the track. The finished end product sounds like this.
Walking through the rave and I feel the vibe pump up. Black tracksuit and my Nike Air Dunks on. Been the same thing ever since I was a younger. Everywhere I go, all I hear is fuck Jumpup.
All right, so that was the video. I hope that you learned something today. If you did in fact learn something, then please let me know in the comments what you thought was most useful. And also, let me know what else you want to see. Let me know any questions that you have. I love answering things in the comments. I'm very active, but also I want to get video ideas from you because I'm here to serve you guys. All right, without further ado, I think that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.